Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Whichever time you are joining us, welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. We are here discussing the book by Eugene Peterson, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. I'm here with John and Darlene. John, could you just show everyone the book that we're looking at? That's one version of the book. The other version is, I think, you can maybe hold up your book. It's also a green one as
Oh,
well.
it's not good.
That's okay. Because obviously your dog is reading with us on this
No,
journey.
it's my bear. It's
Oh,
my
it's your
cat.
cat. Wow. Well, there we go. Well, we're having a good time working through these chapters. Today we are on chapter 13. Chapter 13 is entitled Humility. And maybe Dee, I'll ask you, could you read the psalm for us that we're going to focus on, and then we'll dive into some discussion?
Sure. It reads, God, I'm not trying to rule the roost. I don't want to be king of the mountain. I haven't meddled where I have no business or fantasized grandiose plans. I've kept my feet on the ground. I've cultivated a quiet heart. Like a baby content in its mother's arms, my soul is a baby content. Wait, Israel, for God, wait with hope. Hope now, hope always. Psalm
Okay.
131.
Thank you so much, Dee, for that. So let's dive into a few thoughts that we've kind of reaped from this chapter. I think it probably sums it up on the first page, right at the bottom of the first page. He says two things that Psalms 131 prunes away are unruly ambition and infantile dependency. I guess we'll get into that bit by bit as we go into the chapter. Um, so here, maybe I'll present this problem that I came into contact with this chapter. So I think Eugene Peterson does try to break down the virtue of humility and, not puffing up your chest and not thinking that you are God when it comes to life and things. I had a problem with him using the word ambition. Now, at the beginning of the chapter, he qualifies it by calling it unruly ambition, but I felt like throughout the chapter, he was just diminishing the word ambition. Now, I'm trying to put this over to semantics, and maybe he was just trying to describe a kind of pursuit, which is a one where you desire to create a god of yourself. In other words, diminish the power of God in your life and think that you can solve every problem and fix everything that you need to fix. So that was my only hang up with. I don't feel that he qualified the unruly of the unruly ambition throughout the whole chapter. I felt like he just said, "Yeah, ambition is bad. Don't have ambition." That was just my maybe basic kind of read of that. I'm wondering if any of you got the same impression when you read this chapter.
Oh,
No,
I
I
mean,
mean,
I,
go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say,
Go ahead,
I
D.
think for me too, like initially, I know because I'm thinking to myself, well, I will not have any ambition, but then he has qualified that by saying, well, you should have aspiration, maybe, but not necessarily ambition, because ambition is like for your own selfishness, and it's basically asking the question and striving for who is the greatest, and it's that's where I got out of it. So,
Well, well, actually, no. Let me let John weigh in as well. I wanted to respond to that as well. Go for it.
No, I mean, I thought what he did was pretty subtle, but pretty interesting. And he was talking about how things can change with time, and where at at one time, things can be a terrible problem, but then as a culture kind of accepts it, then that terrible problem becomes less terrible, and then eventually becomes accepted. And I think that's what he meant by what he described as unruly ambition, is describing a lot of people that we look at and admire in at least the American culture, because they've attained the epitome, of their, profession, and they've made more money than anyone else. And then what's even better in the American eye is they've marketed that and made even more money with products that they've produced, and movies that they've made, and music that they've done. I mean, you name it, the entertainment in America at least is full of ambition that we look up to and revere in a lot of ways. And I think what he's saying is that we do that without realizing what we're doing, which we're almost doing that by just talking about it this way. And that, and I would say, yeah, that's probably more the unruly ambition that he talks about, but it is something that we've accepted. I mean, you don't even. I remember when A-Rod in baseball, I think he got $105 million when he signed up with the Yankees, and that was forever ago, and people were just blown away. And now that happens all the time, and people aren't blown away until Ohtani gets $750 million. I mean, these are just numbers you can't even comprehend.
Mm.
And it's literally in a world where 90% of the population lives day by day on, $2 a day or, less.
Mm. Yeah. So there's this quote on page my page 145 where he says, our culture encourages and rewards ambition without qualification. We're surrounded by a way of life in which betterment is understood as expansion and acquisition, as fame. I think all he's trying to say is success without God is prideful.
Oh yeah.
That's what I
Yeah.
that's what
That's
I
what
think
he's saying.
Yeah, but I just maybe I didn't like it, the way that he was almost trying to piece it together, because there were hints of don't have dreams. And yeah, so because the thing is, betterment and expansion and acquisition, and even I'm going to put there, because for some people who want some kind of fame in and of themselves, I don't necessarily think they aren't non-godly things. It's just if there isn't God in each of those things, you find yourself in a very problematic space. Even I'm going to even qualify the word fame, all right? Because to even say that someone is trying to aim for fame can be seemingly incompatible with the Christian pursuit. It depends. Fame could be desired in order to try and help others as a result of things. I don't know. Maybe I'm fishing in a very, very wide pond here, but I get the sense that I really wanted to wrestle with the notion that God wants for us to dream, but God doesn't want for us to create gods of ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can't argue with that. And he does mention, he kind of contrasts ambition with aspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he describes it as a kind of superficial relationship, but then aspiration he defines as an impatient with mediocrity and dissatisfaction with all things created until we are at home with the creator. And goes on to talk about a hopeful striving for the best God has for us. And I think God does want our best.
Hmm.
But I agree with what you're saying. I think trying to achieve our best with our own means ends up being an ungodly thing, and where we maybe get off the path. Whereas if we give our best to God and have this relationship hand in hand that leads us, it may not lead us to fame and money, but it'll certainly lead us to a life of happiness that'll be impactful to others. Maybe I'm just a little too naive. I don't know.
I feel like both words are one and the same and have been merged into our understandings. I'm not seeing much of a distinction between the words ambition and aspiration. He makes those distinctions.
Right.
I'm not. I think it's just more of a case of, in summary, make sure God is a part of everything that you do. When we go back to the Psalm 131, the psalmist starts off, God, I'm not trying to rule the roost. I don't want to be king of the mountain. I haven't meddled where I have no business or fantasize grandiose plans. When I reflect on this psalm and I think about where have I subtly tried to be God of my own life, And it's in the moments when I think about it, where things are going really, really tough. And instead of going straight to God and actually praying or asking Him or seeking wisdom, I start moving the chess pieces of my life around. And I'm just like, well, if I do this and I do that and I go here and I do this, then I'll be able to solve this and I'll sort this out. And it's such a fine line. It's such a fine line of having the intelligence and agency that He has gifted us to be able to solve problems in our lives, and at the same time being fully dependent upon Him. I don't think the two are totally mutually exclusive or incompatible. I just think it's a very, very fine line. And I think that God is encouraging us to be able to just recognize that the source of all our joy, betterment, and success comes from God. And even if He works through us, with us, around us, over us, I think he still deserves the acknowledgement of recognizing that He's the one that has made every part of our life the way that it is in terms of its success, and He gets the glory at the end of the day. That's my take on it.
So I agree, but I'm going to push back a little.
Okay.
And I mean, you've been in America for what, 5 years now?
Mm-hmm.
And even
It's
in
5
Britain,
years?
yeah.
Yeah, 4
No,
4 years.
not.
4 years.
4 years? Okay, 4 years.
Yeah.
But even in Britain, I mean, you're exposed to the fame and money that we see in, I'll just use the broad term, the entertainment business.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see the humility that Eugene Peterson's speaking of in the entertainment business as we know it? I mean, throw out a name or two. Unfortunately, I got two, but I'm not even sure they're great examples.
I mean, I can't argue. There's very, very few out there who, I mean, I can't think of a name that necessarily comes to mind in the media and entertainment industry. But money does stuff and power does stuff to people. It's undeniable. And I can't say that there's many entertainers that I look to and think, now there goes a humble person. I can't say there's many that I think that. Do we throw the baby out with the bathwater, though?
I don't know. And you talk about a fine line, but if you're going to err, I'm not even sure it's a fine line. I think it's incremental movement of the line,
right,
away from God and more towards what you can achieve on your own, and then God gets thrown out with the bathwater. Maybe
I think that's an excellent description. It's an incremental movement. That's an excellent description. I think our lives edge closer and closer, further and further away from God, that it becomes almost subtle, that we don't always recognize it. And that's
and so
a fair
I mean, my thought, and then I'll leave it alone. But my thought is, I mean, if you're going to err in this area, you almost have to err by taking a good, strong step away from that fine line and towards God, and being willing to give up things that you might otherwise be able to achieve, even, you know, on your own, per se, you know, if you felt like you needed to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'll leave it at that. But I think things are eventually become fairly binary. And that incremental movement of the line leaves you far away without even knowing it. And so you almost have to consciously not step across that line and take a big, strong step towards God, and consciously every day, in every way, try to keep Him involved with the decisions you make, small or large, which is hard when things are just going down the tubes, for sure.
Yeah. Dee, did you have any thoughts, further thoughts on this?
On this particular thing we're just talking about?
Yeah, or something else
The
you wanted to bring up?
ambitions.
The ambition. I don't know. To me, you know, the word and being ambitious had always had a bit of a negative connotation to
Oh,
it.
really? Negative?
Uh-huh. yeah. I mean, there was a, and I think the word aspiration is more in line with what I guess what I feel comfortable with. Ambition always just seem like somebody who's going after something. There's nothing good, and he or she's gonna get there, even if they have to step over everyone else. Kind of always kind of that kind of, and maybe this is just America. I don't know.
I've never
Being,
understood ambition to be that way. But anyway, go on.
maybe honestly, maybe it's just American thing. Uh,
No, I understand what you're
it's
saying,
just
Dee.
right. So
That's very interesting. I do have to
yeah.
say, in my experience of being in America for only about 4 years and a bit, is Americans tend to have more confidence to be able to express their qualities and their strengths. Brits are quite reserved, and I'm not saying it's a good thing. And this is a good segue to the other part of the chapter, where Eugene Peterson talks about, well, the solution isn't to minimize yourself and become nothing.
Right.
I think that's been a large temptation within the wider Christianity, that we've dug so close and so deep to God, and we've tuned into His majesty and His wonder and His power and His greatness, and He can do everything and does everything for us. We do nothing. We have no voice. We have no agency. We have no power. We have no nothing, and we step back and we become just bugs, essentially, in the grand scheme of things. And I think he speaks. I say that as the example for the Brits who go to the other end, where we just minimize and understate, and we're reserved and keep stuff in our head. It both are quite equally destructive. The extremes of pride and the extremes of, I don't know what to call it, minimization, maybe something like that. And I think that both don't express the ideals of being made in the image of God. And that's something that became quite apparent for me in this chapter as I considered this. One quote I liked, I'll share, and I'll see what you guys think of this. And as we transition into one other part, Christian faith is not neurotic dependency, but childlike trust. What do you guys think of that? Did that ring anything for you?
Christian faith is not a neurotic dependency, but childlike trust.
Mm.
Yes. I thought the chapter really described who is a Christian.
Okay.
Who is a Christian? Yeah, I really thought so, because I mean how he talks about the progression that we go through as a dependent child of God in our initial growth in faith, and then growing into someone who is actually quite confident, in my mind, confident and sure, and it's not necessarily a confidence and sureness in themselves alone, but knowing that one, you have God, and knowing who you are as a child of God, and you can always depend on Him, makes you become confident, not pridefully confident, but trusting and depending on God confidence. Like I have this, I have God to fall back on. Like it was interesting because one time I was doing Bible study with someone. She wasn't a Christian person, and actually with Eugene and I were doing Bible study together with this person, and she made a comment one day that, like, Darlene, like, you are a really confident person, right? And and I ended up saying to her, it's not so much about like me being confident just in myself rather, but that because I mean, I'm not a perfect person. I have strengths and weaknesses, right? Just like
Mm.
everyone else.
Mm.
And but I'm confident because one, I'm a child of God, and second is because I I have this I have this God that I can depend on,
Mm.
is what I told her, and that's the truth.
Mhm. That's the kind of image that Peterson really brought out. I think he stuck with another translation. I think the New
The
Jerusalem Bible.
Jerusalem Bible translation.
Yeah, the image that was described in Psalms 131 is a weaned child, basically a child that has finished suckling on his mother's breast and is satisfied and probably, I imagine in my head, fast asleep in his mother's arms. That was the image that I had in my head. Um, and I guess Peterson described the transition of what it takes to get to that stage of a weaned child. I just had my baby niece come visit me from England, and they stayed at my house, and so I had cries all throughout the night, and the house was just alight with tears and the trauma of being one. And I personally enjoyed it, but I could see the stress that really affected my sister and her husband, and I could really see the lack of sleep, and they took shifts to be up every 3 hours and all that kind of stuff. Then there was jet lag, and yeah, it was a lot. But I loved her being here. But it gave me like a little window into what it's like through those chaotic times. And then there were these picture perfect moments when my niece was fed, happy, had just had sleep, and was happy to be in my arms or happy to be in someone else's arms, and just very, very happy to play. And that was just so serene and peaceful in those moments. I guess that's the confidence that is exuded when, Darlene, you talk about your relationship with God. Like you've had enough experience of the difficult times that when you feel safe enough to be yourself, you just shine. And I've experienced times like that. I'm sure, John, you've experienced times like this where you just feel safe. And I don't want to say it's dependent on the bad times, but it's because of all the difficult times that we have faced. We've seen how God has been faithful to us, been with us and protected us and nurtured us in those moments. We have every reason to trust in him, every reason to feel confident. And I dip every now and again when things get really, really hard, and I forget sometimes how faithful he has been.
Mm-hmm.
But this image of being weaned, finished, you're very content and full and happy, is a nice, warming, safe feeling that he extracts from the psalm. And that's almost it's almost the opposite of pride. It's the Yeah, I'm not so sure the opposite of pride is humility anymore. I think the opposite of being self-seeking and all of that kind of stuff is actually finding safety in knowing that you can just be totally yourself because God is who he is and you are who you are. And you can kind of rest in that. I found there was definitely some comfort there. John, did you have anything else you wanted to bring?
No, I really like that analogy and the quote that he had, and I forget who it was from, but he says, just as the child gradually breaks off the habit of regarding his mother only as a means of satisfying his own desires and learns to love her for her own sake, so the worshiper, after a struggle, has reached an attitude of mind in which he desires God for himself and not as a means of fulfillment of his own wishes. And
Yeah.
I think that's spot on for me. I mean, too many times we treat God like you kind of treat, Santa Claus at Christmas time as a means to an end,
Yep.
instead of just a coherent, interactive relationship that is fulfilling for you and hopefully fulfilling for God as well, but is a growing experience that takes you out of your comfort zone, but then at the same time keeps you in that safe place. And it's very much a work in progress for me, but I totally understand what Dee's saying. And that analogy was spot on. I thought the mother and child analogy, which unfortunately neither you nor myself, Sam, will ever fully experience, but we can certainly observe it and understand it at least partially.
Yeah. What do you think the totality of this psalm does for you as you walk away from Psalms 131? I'll maybe start the ball rolling and say what it does for me. I think this psalm serves as kind of parameters for me to recognize where my faith exists within. I feel like I'm on a scale that teeters between pride and I don't know if the correct word is minimalism. It's probably not. It's just the thought of feeling that I am nothing and he is everything. That's what I'm trying to describe. I feel like I do this, and both are very unhealthy for me. And I think that God is really wanting me to just be comfortable in my own skin, recognizing that he is my provider and the one that supports me. That's one thing I walk away with that I'm reminded of through this psalm. What about you guys?
Yeah, I like the quote from Spurgeon, Charles Spurgeon, who said, "This psalm is one of the shortest psalms to read, but one of the longest to learn."
Yep.
And the part of the psalm that jumped out at me and felt like it was the part that I connected with the most was the very middle sentence where it says, "I've kept my feet on the ground. I've cultivated a quiet heart." I think sometimes I talk too much. Maybe I dream too much of things that aren't a reality. And sometimes just accepting the reality and living it, knowing that you're protected by God and that he has provided so many good things. And he ultimately does hold the future. For me, keeping my feet on the ground, realizing that, and then just following his lead instead of feeling like I'm always trying to take the lead and always trying to make something happen that just doesn't seem like it's ever going to happen. I need to work more on following his lead and then shutting up a lot more and just listening a lot more.
Yeah. Thanks, Dee. What does this psalm do for you?
I think for me, it's about, who am I in Christ as a child of God? When I think about that, I think there's very little that is external that can have a negative impact on me, at least not a long-lasting negative impact. Maybe I may teeter back and forth, for a little bit while, you know what I mean?
Yep.
But always comes back to knowing who I am as a child of God. And it is such a comfort. It is it gives me such an inner peace and just being able to let things be. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think that brings us to a perfect end of this episode. We want to thank you for joining us on the journey of Pages to Progress. You have been listening to a discussion in chapter 13, Humility, from the book A Long Obedience in the Same Direction by Eugene Peterson. Next week, we will be focusing on chapter 14, entitled Obedience. There's a word a millennial doesn't like. So we're going to dive into that conversation, and we invite you to join us. So from us to you, we wish you God's richest blessings, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.